Hey, Michael.
Hey, Chris, how you doing?
I'm doing great. How about yourself?
I am doing wonderful.
Awesome. Is it early Monday morning for you too, wherever you are?
I am Columbus, Ohio, so it is 10 o'clock in the morning. Yes.
Yeah, that's not that early.
Yeah. And where are you? You're out on the West Coast?
Yeah, I'm on the West Coast. My day usually starts around 5. That's the downside of having East Coast clients, unfortunately. So,
Yes. Yes. I did a stint running the Americas division for a global boutique consulting and training company, and that was based over in Sydney, Australia. And the you think the East Coast West Coast time difference is a problem. The 12-hour difference that comes with Australia is a nightmare,
oh
especially
yeah.
when it's also a business that's working heavily with both India and Europe. I
Oh
didn't
yeah.
know which way was up for those 2 years.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know the feeling. I did a
Yeah.
stint at Citibank running the innovation group there, and we had labs in Singapore and the UK and
Oh,
Ireland, and it was uh, I lost a lot
yeah.
of sleep. Let's say that.
Yeah, it gets really tough to have a work-life balance and still get your job done.
Oh yeah. Well, there
Yeah.
was one time I did fall asleep on a phone call. So I just flown into Singapore and I had a conference call right after that. And I'm like listening in and it was the speaker was just droning on and on. And then before I realized it, the call was over. And I'm like, what just happened? Hopefully I wasn't snoring.
Yeah, I don't know that I've ever done that, but I've definitely wanted to.
Oh man. So tell me a little bit about yourself and your company, what you're passionate about.
Yeah, so are we recording yet?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, we're recording already.
Man,
All right.
I come in hot. That's the way we
All right.
operate on here.
All right, very good. So I work for a company called Expedient.
Mm-hmm.
We're a US based infrastructure as a service provider, and
Oh
I
yeah.
am the vice president of product strategy and innovation for Expedient. I've been there since October, and I'm having a blast. Just kind of digging in deep with kind of trying to transform the world of cloud, which is a lot of fun. Prior to Expedient, I had about 4 years running technology innovation team and doing technology strategy work at Nationwide Insurance. And then the 2 years of consulting at the company I was mentioning a minute ago, and then 20 years at Procter and Gamble doing just about every job in IT over the 20 years, but landing really
Wow.
in strategy and architecture work. So, yeah.
Cool.
And
So that's interesting. So what happened at P&G? Did you just decide to do something more interesting or?
yeah, it was one of those things where there were some business downturns, some leadership shifts that I wasn't necessarily a fan of, and decided it was time to at least think about doing something else, and just ran across a really cool opportunity to basically do a startup with support. Is kind of the way I like to think about it, right? So I had this Australian consulting company that was kind of one of the world's leaders in enterprise architecture. And they did a lot of business all around the globe. They were one of the world's biggest architecture trainers. But every time they had a client in the US, which they regularly had, the founder had to hop on a plane, fly 12 hours or whatever it was to over here to the US to try to service the client. And just made for kind of a very problematic sort of lifestyle for him. And so he brought me in to stand up and run America's division, and eventually would go on to become that organization's chief digital officer. We stood up an America's division. We helped stand up a European division, and I got a chance to work with 13 different companies around the world
Nice.
doing digital transformation strategies and IT strategies and cloud strategies in the 2 years that I was there. So eventually, I decided that I couldn't keep up the pace from a work life balance perspective. I have right now a sophomore in college and 2 seniors in high school.
Nice.
That was
Congratulations.
about 5 years ago. So they were kind of winding down their high school careers, and I could kind of see the end in sight. And my wife and I kind of looked at each other and said, "You're going to miss all of it. So why are we doing this to ourselves?"
Yeah.
And so I found this opportunity at Nationwide, and it's right there in the name, Nationwide. They do business in the U.S., which kind of made for a much better work-life balance, not nearly as much travel, and still a really cool and exciting opportunity to bring technology innovation into the company. So had a lot of fun doing that, and now I'm here.
So what do you define as digital transformation? Because there's so many definitions of that term. It's like you ask one person, they say it's X, and then somebody else says it's Y. In your mind, what do you feel digital transformation is?
So great question, because one of the things I do that I didn't share yet is that I actually teach all things digital at Ohio State.
Oh, nice.
So an alumni of Ohio State. I'm a big Buckeye fan, and so when I moved back to Columbus to join Nationwide a few years ago, I decided to kind of check off a kind of a lifelong dream to teach at Ohio State. And so I started teaching undergrads about digital, and then actually that over the last year has morphed into creating, as the academic director, a new digital executive education program in conjunction with the College of Business.
Nice.
So when, to your point, when you ask what is digital, when I talk to my students and to the executives that come into my courses, I explain digital as leveraging technology and data to transform a customer experience or a business model.
Hmm.
And that's very, very different than how we have historically leveraged technology. Historically, we have leveraged technology looking inward within our companies. We leverage technology to drive productivity, to do transactional processing, to drive automation. But we didn't historically spend a lot of time focusing on technology outward facing with our companies. And so that's really been the big shift that I would like to describe as the digital movement, has been taking technology and starting to turn it towards the outside of our companies and to our customer interactions.
Hmm. Yeah, and it's I think it's not technology first, but it's sort of customer first. And then you have to take the customer first view, and then how do you apply technology to it? Because I think a lot of companies, like, they do it the wrong way around. They go, "Oh, we want to incorporate AI." And it's like, well, AI, your customer may not need AI, right? It's
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
what is the problem or the process you're trying to solve, and then work backwards to bring the technology into it, because the technology can solve anything, right?
You're exactly right, Chris. So one of the courses I teach, an executive guide to managing digital, is about a 6-hour course, and I spend about 20 minutes talking about technology. The rest of that course is about culture, mindsets, processes, frameworks, laying out a vision for a digital enterprise. There's just so much else that goes into digital transformation. The technology obviously is a piece of it, and it's what enables us to do things we couldn't otherwise do. But data, I would say, is just as important a piece, right? That's
Right.
another thing that historically we've not leveraged the kind of data that's available to us to gather those insights about the customers, like you talk about. The customer experience is such an important part, but then understanding what we know and learn about our customers, and then using that data to help us transform those experiences is also critically important.
Right. So one of the things that I've been spearheading a lot is sort of like a transition from DIY to DIFM. So a lot of times companies say, "Oh, well, we need to give our customers tools to do these things." But the customers are pushing back and going, "We don't want tools. We want you to do these things for me." I mean, do you think there's still a trend towards that, or you think we're stepping away from something like that?
This is an interesting question. I think um, I think you're right. I think we are starting to see customers no longer want to do it all themselves. I think they're wanting to get help, more and more help, because quite frankly, the world we live in is getting more and more complex by the day, right? And so and and as a leader in an organization, it's critically important that you're driving the business outcomes that you're looking for, but the amount of things that you have to know to be able to lead transformations on your own just continues to increase exponentially. And so I think you're exactly right. Getting getting partners to help you on the journey, I think, is becoming more and more critical for leaders in every single kind of organization.
Right. So earlier on, you were mentioning data. Like, tell me a little bit about what your thoughts of data's role in all this. Are you talking about big data? Are you talking about, edge data? What kind of data are you talking about?
Well, I think data can have an impact in a number of different ways. The specific kind of data I was talking about to start with is data in understanding our customers, right? Understanding our customers' preferences, understanding our customers' behaviors and actions, and then being able to respond appropriately to that. But to your point, as we think about the introduction of technology into the conversation, technology like IoT, the sensors that we can now put into just about everything, right, enables us to collect and capture data at a far different level of granularity than we've ever been able to do before. And so by being able to capture that data, we can now react and respond to it at the micro level, at the immediate transactional level. But we also need to leverage, to your point, technologies like big data, technologies like artificial intelligence, to be able to process, manage, and interpret that data at the macro level, right? And so I think we've got to be able to work with data at both levels. Otherwise, we won't be able to be as effective as we want.
So how do you balance privacy with all that? Because I mean, everyone's heard of the story where Target started sending these inappropriate ads to individuals. I mean, we're still in that space there. How do you deal with, you have all this data about the customer, but you don't want to necessarily reveal that you have all of this data. So how do you balance the privacy with the data piece?
I think that's a great question. I think um, one of the things that I believe is that if we're taking that customer first perspective, part of managing the privacy is understanding what our customers want, right?
Mhm.
Do our customers want us to use the information that we've gathered about them or that they're providing to us? Do they want us to use that information in this context? Do they want us to use that information in other contexts? So one of the important things about data, right, is data comes with a context, right? And so when a customer says, yes, you can use my credit card information, right, to be able for them to pay for that dinner they're ordering over Grubhub, right? They they're giving you permission in that context to use that credit card information. They're not giving you permission to use that credit card information at all times, right? So it's critically important that you, as an organization, respect the context. You only use the data when you have permission to use it for the purpose you have permission to use it, and then if you are keeping that data once it's beyond that particular usage, that you have the permission of the individual, and then you're keeping that data safe and secure using encryption technologies and everything else that needs to go into that. But if you are the reason you get into trouble, right, is when you take data that you know and then you use it out of context without permission, right? And that's what that Target example was. They collected a bunch of data in one context they applied it in a very unique and interesting way in a different context. And that was interesting and it was great, but they didn't have permission to apply it in that new context. And that's where they got themselves in a little bit of trouble.
Yeah, that's interesting though, because you kind of, if you think about it, I mean, a lot of the times when you look at these terms and conditions, they're kind of blanket statements, right? They're just like, capture your data and I can reuse it to do all sorts of things. And then the other key piece there is that they're probably still doing it. They're just being a lot less obvious about it, kind of like the way Google is. Remember,
Right.
originally when Gmail first came out, there was all this hem and hawing about, oh, they're reading our emails so they can put ads against our emails. Like, they're still doing it. They're just not putting ads directly against your emails, right? I mean,
Exactly. I mean, and to your point, right? This is this is one of the reasons why with the work that we do with Ohio State, we actually believe that for every single one of the certifications that we put people through. So we have a series of role-based certifications as part of our digital executive education program. Every one of those certifications includes a course on digital ethics for this very reason, because it's important for us to grapple with and get into conversation about the ethics related to using data in different ways. And it's important for us to understand that technology is changing so rapidly that it's impacting what we can do in near real time. And so how do we deal with that? How do we grapple with that when the technology and the use of data gets out ahead of the law, right? It may be legal for you to do something. Is it ethical, right?
mhm.
And so that's an important thing for all of us to grapple with, to have an understanding about, and get into discussion about. And that's why we include that as part of our certification programs at Ohio State.
Yeah, I think most companies should have a chief philosopher, because if you look at what happened with VW and companies like that, there's nobody up in the C-suite that's going, hey, let's look at the ethics of this situation. Because, you can't get away with anything anymore. I mean, you have billions of people out there who will investigate everything to the nth degree. They'll just jump on it for fun, right? I mean, if you think
Right.
about people on Reddit and, and stuff like that, who are just like, they just jump on it. You can't get
Well,
away with it.
and the point is, we don't want to be getting away with things. I mean, if we're truly behaving in an ethical manner, we're not trying to get away with anything, right?
Yep.
We're trying to serve our customers in the best way possible. And we're trying to understand where those lines and boundaries are per that relationship we have with even each individual customer. And that's part of the challenge here, right? Is when you get into this ethics conversation, it's not a blanket statement. It's not a one size fits all. It's a very personal conversation on your personal ethics, moralities, what's right and what's wrong. And as an organization, we have to be able to have that conversation at scale with every single one of our customers and figure out ways to serve them how they best want to be served. And that's incredibly challenging.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's no way to have a blanket statement, because customer A might be okay, do anything you want with all my data, and customer B might say, that's, and you have every flavor in between. So it's very difficult to manage that. That's where you need systems to be able to manage that, because it just becomes unwieldy.
And I'll be honest, I've not necessarily seen anybody that's got it right. Right? I mean, we're all, as organizations, struggling with and trying to figure out how to do this and do it better, right?
Mhm.
And I would say, not even just get it, how do we do it right, but how do we do it better than we're doing it today on a journey to right? Because
Right.
that's a long journey and we got a long ways to go in most organizations.
Right.
So
So you've spearheaded innovation in a lot of companies, it sounds like. So can you tell me a bit about some of the challenges you've overcome in some of those places?
yeah, so when I think about challenges from an innovation perspective, I think number one is culture, right? First and foremost, are you creating an organization where you can support a culture of innovation, right? And a culture of innovation, what do I mean by that? I mean, you've got an organization that's willing to let people fail. You've got an organization that is willing to let people make decisions at low levels of the organization. Of people that are involved in the actual experiments are the ones that are driving the decision making. And you've got an organization that is willing to fund and support experimentation, right? Those are some of the key things I think from a culture standpoint. And there's probably 100 others that you could name, but I think those are some of the most important. And I think it's one of the things that I've seen a lot of organizations struggle with, right? It's easy to say, well, it's okay to fail, except when you get to the time for your annual review and you failed a couple of times, and now it's going to come back and bite you, either because A, your annual review, you don't have enough successes, or B, somebody wants to raise the failures, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's a real challenge in organizations. It's probably the biggest challenge, I would say, is culture. I think the other challenge that I would highlight is innovation is different than how we've done work before, right? And I would liken digital and innovation to very similar in this vein. And in fact, this is the analogy I use in my class. Historically, when we would build out new systems, new technology projects, we would build them with a fairly structured, rigorous project management led approach, and we would take 6 months, 12 months, 18 months to build out the system. But we knew what we were building, and we could build something pretty reliably. I liken that to a manufacturing line where you're going to put inputs in one side and you're going to have the outputs that you want come out the other side, and you know what's going to come out the other side. Well, when you think about digital, when you think about innovation, you're changing that mental model. You're starting to become a scientist. You don't know what you're looking for. You don't know the answer. You have a hypothesis, but you need to run some experiments to figure out what the actual answer is. And so it's a different mental model. It's a different approach. And that's why I think innovation is different. We have to be able to put out a hypothesis, run some experiments, learn what worked, what didn't work, react, respond, and try again.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a very, very different approach and different mental model than how we have done things historically in organizations.
It's interesting because it's almost like an academic model, right? It's like it's what you do in labs, right?
Yeah.
But it's not corporate, right? At all, if you think about it.
Well, I mean, actually, it is corporate. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
it's the scientific method, right? And if you go to some of the largest companies in the world, take my old company, Procter and Gamble, they had over 10,000 folks in their R&D organization. Most of those PhD scientists, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
This was how they do work. This is how they invented the next tide, right? It's through the scientific method. It's through putting forth hypotheses, testing out and running experiments, and seeing the results of those experiments, documenting and learning from them, right?
Yeah.
So while I agree with you, it seems a little bit more academic. It is absolutely corporate in that it's how the world's biggest companies have been developing products for years.
Well, you're talking about companies like Procter and Gamble, but there's plenty of others who don't go anywhere near experimentation because they're so afraid. They're so afraid of failure. Like, for example, financial services or healthcare. They're all like, oh, we're highly regulated. We can't do this. We can't do that. How do you fit experimentation in to those more traditional industries?
Yeah, that's a great question, and in fact, I think that's why you see um, companies that come from the consumer products space many times be on the leading edge of emerging technologies, right? Because
Mm.
they're used to this mindset of experimentation. When we think about financial services, banking, healthcare, I think the mental model shift still needs to happen. right? We just have to be a little bit more controlled in how we set up our labs, so to speak, right? So I think we have to be intentional about setting up labs, setting up ways for people to learn. And I think we need to be clear on where can we run experiments and where can we not, right? And so one of the things that I may get the state wrong, but one of the things that I've heard about a number of states, and Wyoming is the one I'll use as an example in the financial services space, is I've heard of states creating blockchain regulatory experimentation labs, right?
Mm.
So basically, what they're creating is this space and this permission within a specific context for you to set aside certain regulations so that you can run experiments, right? And they provide some instructions, some guidelines on how you're going to do that. But in this space where we're dealing with a new technology, that we're dealing with a lot of unknowns, they've set aside this lab space from a state government perspective that allows and provides the freedom in financial services to experiment with emerging technologies. And I think you're seeing more and more states try to tackle that problem, provide those sort of regulatory sandboxes, so to speak, for companies to be able to run those experiments. So for me, I think understanding where the governments are trying to help you as an organization with these sorts of sandboxes that you can use, and then leaning into those, right? Taking advantage of those and running those sorts of experiments and trying to learn within the scope and scale of what's allowable from a regulatory perspective is a great approach for financial services for highly regulated industries.
That's interesting. I didn't even know that that was happening. I kind of thought about that like a while back, and we were talking about, well, why don't we create these innovation zones where, certain regulations are lifted in those areas? It's kind of like harkening back to, when we were starting to figure out flight, right? I mean, when you had people trying to fly, get off the ground like Wilbur and Orville Wright, people would be hurting themselves or they'd be killing themselves trying to, get to that position. And now we're also afraid of doing that stuff. And there's so many regulations to keep us from doing that. But I didn't realize that there were actual places in the States where you do see that sort of lifting of regulations so people can try new things.
Yeah. Well, one of the other things that I would throw out for you, right, is again, leveraging what's possible now that wasn't possible before can also help us in the innovation space. And the example I will give you there is again back to my days at Procter and Gamble, with shampoo, creating a new shampoo, right? Inevitably, people are going to put that on their hair.
Yeah.
If we have hair, right? So you and I don't have quite as much hair as some people do, right? But inevitably, you have to put it on your hair. So you have to test it with humans. And
Yeah.
before you test any sort of chemical on a human, you want to test it in other ways, right? And so for the longest time in the consumer goods industry, there was animal testing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was something that organizations didn't want to do, but there had to be a way to test something before you put it on a human. And
Yep.
this was the best way that they could come up with
Yep.
until digital came along. And we had the opportunity to test things with technology, to leverage our digital capabilities to allow us to simulate human testing before we actually tested something on a human. And the recent vaccines that have been created in support of the pandemic actually are doing the exact same thing. The way that we've been able to create vaccines in the span of a year versus 5 years or 10 years that has been historically the norm is because the researchers and the scientists have leveraged technology in a way that wasn't possible before. They've been able to leverage technology to simulate and test much more rapidly in the very early stages of the vaccination creations than we've ever been able to do before, right? And so at some point, you still have to have your final stage clinical trials, but the efficacy results have been significantly better, and they've been able to get through that process much faster because they've been able to leverage technology in the process in new and exciting ways.
Wow, I can't imagine. That sounds fantastic, but I can't imagine how you would simulate a human being in code. I guess that's what you're doing, right? You're simulating a human being in code, and then you're applying the vaccine to the human being. How does that work?
Well, at the end of the day, right, human beings are DNA. They're made
Mm,
up of DNA. And DNA is nothing but a series of I'm gonna get out over my skis here pretty quickly. 26 different characteristics or genes, right? Or actually, it's not 26. It's far more than that. But anyways, you can think about DNA similarly to the way that we think about bits and bytes on a computer, right?
mm.
And so if you think about DNA similar to the way you think about bits and bytes on a computer, you can start to simulate interactions, right? And you can start to predict response, right? And so we're able to leverage historical data, we're able to leverage what we've learned, we're able to leverage technology to be able to begin to predict things that we weren't able to do before.
Fantastic, fantastic. I love that concept because, I'm a big fan of the Culture series and Ian Banks. I don't know if you like science fiction, but it's like far future, post scarcity stuff. And he talks about this situation where the AIs make decisions by running a million simulations at the same time to determine the best outcome. It's kind of like that scene from the Avengers where Doctor Strange does all the different simulations and said, "Oh, this is the only one that we prevail in." It's kind of like that. So it really is a bit like that, right? It's like it runs all these simulations and then it can come out with the best result.
And we're just on the verge of what's possible when it comes to that, right?
Hmm.
So we're able to do some of that today. We leveraging cloud, it puts incredible compute power in the hands of individuals at a really low cost and enables us to do some of those kinds of things. But as we look forward into the future, we look at technologies like quantum computing. We look at technologies like 5G or even 6G, which is already on the horizon, even though 5G is just now coming out, right? It's and we look at data technologies that are going to enable us to store and process significantly larger amounts of data than we can today. These kinds of technologies will enable us to do exactly what you just described, to be able to run millions and millions of simulations on very complex and complicated problems in a very short period of time, right? And that kind of stuff is not very far out. It's
Mhm.
on the near term horizon. If you think about kind of time horizons, we're talking potentially being able to do some of those things within 5 years.
Fantastic. And in fact, I was just about to ask you, it's like foresight time. Where do you think we're going to be in 2031, like 10 years from now? Do you think that all that stuff will be predominant? Like we'll be able to run all these fantastic simulations and sort of actually predict certain types of behavior?
Yeah, so will it be predominant? I think is a great question. And it reminds me of a William Gibson quote. The future is already here, it's just unevenly distributed, right? I may have
Mhm.
butchered the quote a little bit, but you get the idea,
Oh, I think you
right?
got it perfect.
And I think that what we will see is that some of these technologies, if we look 5 to 10 years out, will be here, but they won't be broadly in use yet, right? Just like we have autonomous vehicles today, we have cars that can drive themselves running around in San Francisco today, right? But they're not broadly available. They're not broadly in use. They
Mhm.
will over time. That expansion across the country, across the globe, on the use of these technologies, I think is going to take a little bit of time. But I think you will see these sorts of amazing, groundbreaking technologies within the next 5 to 10 years.
Mhm. Mhm. Absolutely. And so if you had if you had some prediction as to what else was going to happen, can you throw out some more predictions of where you think things are going to be in 10 years?
Sure. So I'll come back to kind of my three areas of particular focus: cloud, digital transformation, and IT operating models are kind of big kind of research and investment areas for me personally. So in the cloud, I think what we're going to see in the cloud is the world will be multi-cloud. And what do I mean by that? I think organizations will use the best of the best from each individual cloud, but that we will have technology in place that will enable us to manage across the clouds to enable to make that simpler. Again, back to your whole concept of DIY versus DIFM, if I remember right.
Yep.
Right now, the cloud is a DIY world, right? And what we're going to have is we're going to move a lot more towards a DIFM world, while still allowing us to do a little bit of that DIY. And I think that's going to be because people and organizations need to find their niche, need to find their focus area to really do things well, right? So you go do what you do really, really well and get some help on everything else, right? So I think that's what we'll see over the next 5 to 10 years in the cloud. In the digital context, I think we're going to have world-class digital experiences. I think that the evolution of digital transformation is going to actually mean that a lot of the companies that we know and love today are going to be gone 5 to 10 years from now, right? I don't know which ones, but will we still have Ford, GM, and the big three, right? Will we still have the Walmarts of the world? Maybe, maybe not, right? But there will be companies that are in the Fortune 500 today, companies that are probably in the Fortune 100 today, that won't exist 5 years from now, that won't exist 10 years from now. So I think, and that's going to be driven by and caused by digital. And then the other thing I would say on that IT operating model piece, for me, at the end of the day, what I see happening is technology is becoming embedded into everything that we do. It's just part of who we are as a company, as individuals. We're all going to have to understand technologies much, much more than we do today. And so I think what we will see is there will be this, today, there's still this kind of dichotomy between IT and the business. We hear that in the IT world a lot. I don't think there will be a split 10 years down the road. There will just be the business. There will just be organizations, and technology will be embedded in every single piece of that. In fact, I can tell you that I've over the last several years started to hear several organizations making the shift already. My CEO at Nationwide a couple of years ago, actually, at this point, said something to the effect of, Nationwide is no longer an insurance company. Nationwide is now a technology company that just happens to sell financial services and protection products.
Yeah.
Right. And I think you see that over and over and over again across multiple industries. Now, is that a little bit of lip service today? Maybe. But I think that's going to be true for enterprises all over the world in a very short period of time.
Yeah. And actually, as you think about it, I mean, I was going to ask you about Nationwide. It's like, were you in the innovation group at Nationwide? Were you spearheading innovation within Nationwide as well?
I was part of technology innovation. We actually had two separate groups, a corporate innovation and a technology innovation. My group focused on providing the technology engagement and support with the corporate innovation team for all of the new product development that we were doing, as well as doing all of the research on emerging technologies and trying to identify the new what's possibles the technology would create. So we had kind of a dual charter.
Did you find it was difficult to get leadership to buy into this stuff that you were coming up with?
No, actually, yes and no. We had tremendous leadership support. We had tremendous investment in the organization. on both the innovation side and the technology innovation side. However, it still was a challenge when we brought new ideas forward, ideas that were a little bit different than what we had done historically within the organization. There was still a little bit of pushback, right? Because it was something different. And we were a Fortune 75 company that was very successful. Why would we go down this path of creating this new thing when we're doing so well with what we do today, right?
Right.
And so there was always this constant struggle and push to be able to bring new innovation to the table. And I think every successful organization is going to have that. It kind of goes back to Clayton Christensen's kind of seminal book, the Innovator's Dilemma, right? It's this constant problem where in order for us to drive innovation, we have to disrupt ourselves, and that's a really, really hard thing to do.
And when you did, like, when you were, can you think of some successful tactics that you used to help push that through in that particular type of company?
Yeah, so we one of the things we did, our innovation team was a separate team from the core business to try to give them some autonomy to come up with new ideas. The innovation team was incredibly focused on bringing that voice of the customer in first and really focusing on that sort of customer wants and needs. So I think those were both incredibly successful. They had their downsides as well. But one of the things I actually really, really liked about Nationwide specifically in the way they approached innovation was that, yes, we started with customer first, but before you could take an innovation forward, you had to hit all three of the abilities. You had to hit desirability, feasibility, and viability. Do customers want it? Can you make it? And can you make money at it? Right. And the perfect innovation had to meet all three of those criteria to really go forward. And I think that intersection point of do customers want it? Can you actually build it at scale at a price point that makes sense? And can you get the right value out of it, both make money internally and provide the right value to your customers? I think that intersection point is probably the best way to take innovation forward.
Yeah, no, I love that framework because a lot of times people forget about that last one, especially innovators who are really into, oh, this is so cool, we have to do this. It's like, wait a minute, where's the value, right? Where's the value? I mean, the customers might want it and it's doable, but where's the value to the organization? I think that's key to pitching anything, really. I mean, and you may want to do some of those first, and then you might be able to slip something in where there's slightly lower value later on once you've had some successes with the first set.
Absolutely.
Right.
And I tell you what, the framework, the model works regardless of what kind of company you're talking about. I mentioned we used the model at Nationwide, but I'm using the same model at my current company at Expedient. We're as I think I mentioned at the beginning, we're an infrastructure as a service technology provider, and we're using that same model to help us identify the new products that we're going to bring to the market for our clients. And so I think it doesn't matter whether you're in high tech or insurance or consumer goods. It doesn't matter whether you're a large enterprise or a startup. Leveraging that approach, that mental model, those three intersection points, and then finding ways to validate what you're learning on each of those three aspects, I think works universally.
That's fantastic. You should write a book. I can see
I
that.
think there's books out there on this one already.
I can totally see that as a book. I mean, you've encapsulated it so well. I mean, I don't think anybody I've talked to has ever done it so well.
I tell you what, I actually, this is something I do present on. I have presented on before to startup audiences for how do you validate an idea. And I find it just resonates, right? It's easy. It's very simple to to kind of create the right kind of templates to be able to take people through this very simple process, it really boils innovation down into something that's manageable and understandable that can be done anywhere.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I love it. So this has been great. Thank you so much. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
You can reach out to me at LinkedIn. I'm Michael Fulton on LinkedIn, or you can reach out to me on my email address, michael.fulton@expedient.com.
Very nice. All right, I'll put all your bio and information in the show notes, so people who want to get in touch with you, they'll go directly to you. So thank you very much, sir. It was a great conversation.
Great. Talk to you later, Chris. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.